Chapter 3. The Half Twist. Alternating Half Twist Anklet. For this anklet, I will use 8 strands. Pull and cut 4 strands of hemp that are about 6 times your desired anklet length, plus an additional foot or so. Fold the strands in half to make a loop and tie an overhand knot. Begin by separating your strands so that you have 4 strands on the left and 4 strands on the right. Start with the 4 strands on the left. Use the 2 outer strands to make 6 half-twist knots around the 2 middle ones. Do the same thing using the 4 remaining strands on the right. Separate your strands so that you have 4 in the middle and 2 on either side. Tie 6 half-twist knots using the 2 strands on either side. Separate the strands again so that you have 4 strands on the left and 4 strands on the right. Again, make 6 half-twist knots with the 4 strands on the left and 6 half-twist knots with the strands on the right. Continue this pattern for the entire anklet. Tip: if you start with your mouse ear on the left on one side, start with your mouse ears on the right for the other side. This is optional and creates symmetry. It only applies when you are working with 4 strands on either side. If that sounds complicated, just do all your knots in the same direction. You will still have a great anklet in the end. End your anklet by making an overhand knot. Cut away excess material. Secure your knot with fabric glue and allow to dry. Use the loop and knot to close your anklet. Simple half-twist bracelet with beads. As the name suggests, this is a very simple bracelet. I will use 4 strands for this bracelet. Pull 2 strands of hemp about 6 times your desired length, plus another foot. Begin, of course, by folding your strands in half, making a loop, and securing it with an overhand knot. Use the 2 outer strands to make 10 half-twist knots. Then, string a bead onto the 2 middle strands. Restart your count to make another 10 half-twist knots and string on another bead. As you work, your knotting strings will twist around your middle strand. Just allow the strings to do so instead of trying to fight with them. You will lose the battle. Repeat this pattern until you have achieved your desired length. End by making an overhand knot. Cut away excess string and secure the knot with fabric glue. Square knot. The fishbone. This design is aptly named. As you work, notice that your strands actually resemble the bones of a fish. The finished product also resembles the fish bones that you see in cartoons, such as when the alley cat pulls one out of the trash. The fishbone is actually one of my favorite designs to make. Because this pattern is so delicate, I prefer to use waxed hemp with it, though I have not always done so. Waxed hemp stands up a little better to moisture than natural hemp does. The waxed hemp also feels less irritating on your skin. This design will not stand up against getting totally wet, whether you use waxed hemp or not, so be sure to remove this piece before swimming or bathing. For this one, you will need 8 strands. Pull and cut 4 strands of hemp that are about 6 times your desired length, plus another foot. Fold all of your strands in half, make a loop, and secure with an overhand knot. To start, pull the 2 center strands tight. I am using dyed hemp here so that you can easily see which strands to use. Taking the first inner strand on either side, next to the center strands, tie a square knot. Do the same with the second and third, working your way from the inside out. Now, using the center strands, string your first bead. Starting with the top 2 strands, tie a square knot, leaving enough slack so that you have a circle. Repeat this process twice more, always starting with the bottom strands. When you have tied 3 square knots, string another bead and start again with the top strands. When repeated, you have the pattern shown above. Notice that the strands rotate to make an alternating pattern when you use colors. To finish, tie 3 square knots as you did to begin the piece, and then tie an overhand knot at the very end. Snip away any excess strand and secure your knot with fabric glue. Choker with square knot variation. For this example, I will use 4 strands. Pull 2 hemp strands about 6 times your desired length. Fold the strands in half and tie a loop with an overhand knot. Separate your strands so that you have 2 strands in the middle and 1 on either side. Begin by making 3 square knots, using the outer 2 strands to make the knots around the 2 inner strands. Reverse your strands so that your 2 inner strands are now the outer strands, and the outer strands are now the middle strands. This is sometimes referred to as making an inside-out square knot. Now, make 3 more square knots. Reverse your strings again and make 3 more square knots. Repeat this pattern for the entire necklace. Finish with 3 square knots and then tie an overhand knot. Secure with fabric glue. Square knot beaded anklet. This is a very simple, elegant design. For this anklet, I will use 4 strands. Pull and cut 2 strands of hemp that are about 6 times your desired anklet length, plus about 1 foot. Fold the strands in half and make a loop, secured by an overhand knot. You should now have 4 strands. Separate your strands so that you have 1 strand on either side and 2 in the middle. You will be making your knots around the 2 middle strands. It is easiest to go ahead and string all the beads you will be using at this point. You do not have to be exact. You can always add more or subtract a few if you string too many. To begin the anklet, make 2 square knots around the 2 middle strands using the 2 outer strands. String 1 bead and make another square knot. String your next bead and make another square knot. Continue the pattern of 1 bead, then 1 square knot until you have reached your desired length. End the bracelet with 2 square knots and an overhand knot. Snip any excess string and secure with fabric glue. End the anklet with 2 more square knots. Tie an overhand knot. Tie more than 1 overhand knot if necessary to add length or to make your knot fit the loop. The half hitch. The bar. This style is really good for making belts, though it will require a great deal of patience due to the length you will need. It is very easy to get the long strands tangled. I will use 4 strands here. The first strand, which will be used to tie around the other 3, needs to be much longer. A good estimate would be about 1 foot per every inch of length you want in your finished piece. The other 3 strands can be to scale, or maybe slightly longer just in case. From here, I will refer to your long strand as the bar strand to avoid confusion. From left to right, using your bar strand, tie a half hitch knot in the next strand. Tie a half hitch knot in the next 2 strands. When you have tied a half hitch knot on all 3 strands, flip your piece over. Continue tying half hitch knots just as you did the first 3. Each time you reach the last strand, flip your piece over and begin a new row of knots from left to right. In the end, you should have a pattern such as the one shown above. The overhand knot. Overhand knot belt. Having been a vegetarian for many years, I committed myself to avoiding leather and other animal byproducts. 2 things that have always been hard for me to find are cute non-leather shoes and belts. Aside from the occasional barefoot sandal, I have not yet mastered the shoe part, but I have made quite a few belts, which are now an essential part of my wardrobe. The advantage is that I save a lot of money, not to mention they are personalized to my own taste. This is a very simple design, but it is tedious, so be prepared to take your time. The end result is well worth it. Measure around your waist and pull 4 strands of hemp that are 6 times that length. Fold all of your strands in half and make an overhand knot. Separate your strands so that you have 1 strand on either side. You will not use these for knotting in the first row. And 3 groups of 2 strands in the middle. Tie an overhand knot using each group of 2 strands. Begin a new row. Separate your strands so that you have 4 groups of 2 strands. Tie an overhead knot in each group of 2 strands. After you have tied overhand knots in all 4 groups, begin a new row. Separate your strands again so that you have 1 strand on either side that will not be used for knotting, and 3 groups of 2 strands in the middle, just as you did to begin the belt. Tie overhand knots in each of the 3 groups of 2 strands. Repeat the pattern of 3 knots, then 4 knots, then 3 knots again, until you achieve your desired length for the belt. You should end up with a design that resembles the one shown above. At the end of my belts, I like to leave fringe. I think it adds a very pretty chic element. Plus, it gives me a little room to grow. Not that I've ever needed it. Anyway, there are several creative ways to end this belt. I will give a few options below. Option 1. Simply tie an overhand knot. Use the hanging fringe through your loop to tie the belt. Option 2. Tie several overhand knots as shown above. This is still cute, but you will have less fringe. Option 3. End with a bead and 1 overhand knot as shown above. It will add a decorative element and you will still have fringe. Option 4. End with several beads and secure each bead with overhand knots on either side, as shown in the picture above. You could even add 2 or 3 beads between your knots. You might even opt to tie several smaller beads on each strand so that you can keep the fringe and still have beads for more decoration. The possibilities are endless. Chapter Review. Use waxed hemp for the fishbone design if you have it available. Do not get your fishbone design wet. With one type of knot, you can make several different styles. Be sure to allow adequate room at the end of your jewelry to make closing knots. You can make accessories as well as making jewelry.